deepening anger at his handling of the jihadist insurgency. The military later announced that it had taken control of all of the country's borders. Spokesperson for the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Ravina Shamdasani, says it's important that the hard-won democratic human rights gains made in Burkina Faso be preserved.
The High Commissioner deeply deplores the military takeover of power in Burkina Faso yesterday. During her visit to Burkina Faso last November, she had stressed the importance of preserving the hard-won democratic and human rights gains made in the country, noting in particular the peaceful legislative and presidential elections that had been held in 2020. In the face of the security threats and the tremendous humanitarian challenges facing the country, it is more important than ever to ensure that the rule of law, constitutional order, and the country's obligations under international human rights law are fully respected. It is crucial for democratic space to be effectively protected, to ensure people are able to air their grievances and their aspirations, and to participate in meaningful dialogue to work towards addressing the many crises in the country.
All right, we stay with that story. I'm joined now by head of the Sahel Programme at the Institute of Security Studies, Ornella Moderan. Ornella, good evening. Thank you very much for your time and joining us tonight here on In Focus. The UN deplores the coup takeover, but several hundreds of Burkinabes showed up at the capital, Ouagadougou, in support of the military takeover of the country. Is the nation divided?
Well, I mean, there is indeed a sort of divide. On the one hand, there is a portion of the public opinion in Burkina which welcomes this move as something that could set the country on a better path to tackle insecurity and jihadism. On the other side, of course, there are concerns that that a military transition could come with a cost in terms of rule of law, obviously, but also human rights. So it's still quite early, in fact, to say exactly what the intention of the putsch makers exactly are and how things are really going to evolve.
Yeah. Some are saying, of course, they've been calling for President Kabore to depart several times, and he didn't listen, and now the army heard us and they understood. What is the impact then of this particular move on the ground in terms of activities? And we know the borders have been closed, but has it had severe impact on the people?
Until now, no, not really. I mean, as you mentioned, there have been calls for President Kabore to resign for months, especially following a particularly bloody attack that happened in November last year. Some 53 gendarmes from the Burkinabe forces were killed in a deadly attack in the town of Inata. And then it was discovered that they had been lacking basic supplies, including food, for several days. So this created a massive outcry in the country and comforted the impression that essentially the executive power was not playing its part. So there have been calls both from the military but also from the general citizenry for a change at least of government, and a change of government did happen in December, but obviously that wasn't enough. So now we're seeing a much more radical change of regime altogether. Now, whether or not the military who have taken power are going to be able to do better is left to be seen.
Yeah. What's your assessment? Does this coup takeover make Burkina Faso more vulnerable to insurgency, or does it bring some degree of security?
Well, I mean, in the immediate term, of course, there are risks, right? So looking at the example of other countries in the region, such as Mali, for instance, one thing we have seen over and over again is that coups create a sort of institutional confusion while everyone is trying to figure out how the new order is going to work. And this confusion is an opportunity for insurgent groups and violent extremist groups in particular to capitalize on and to make inroads. So it would be very important for things to come together quite quickly so that this doesn't lead to further inroads for the groups that the coup makers themselves claim they're here to fight.
Yeah. Is there real risk for human rights violations here?
Honestly, human rights have been under attack in Burkina Faso for a long time now, both from the side of jihadist groups, but also from the side of governmental forces. So, I mean, it's hard to see why things would get better at this point. Unfortunately.
Did President Kabore fail in his military strategy, or did he have a military strategy at all on the ground to deal with insurgency?
I would say, in fact, that he had a strategy, and a part of the problem with his strategy was precisely that. It was only a military strategy. What we have in Burkina Faso, just like as in the rest of the Sahel, Niger and Mali included, is a complex security problem which includes political and social dimensions. So, the over-reliance on a military-only option has not delivered success in any of the three countries. What's needed is a much broader political approach, and that's one of the things that have been lacking in Burkina. On top of that, President Kabore was also handicapped by very difficult relationships with the military. There has been a deep distrust between the political leadership in Burkina and the military and security establishment for years now, at least since the removal of the previous head of state, Blaise Compaoré, in 2014. These parameters, I would say, have created the conditions for President Kabore to essentially be cornered, not to mention, of course, that a security sector reform was due to happen, which never happened, leaving the security system of the country essentially unfit for purpose. Yeah.
News agencies reporting that the business in Ouagadougou actually is as normal as can be, in spite of the latest turmoil, in a sense, saying it's business really as usual. The markets are open, the shops are open, petrol stations are open, everything is working as normal. I mean, do you get a sense that this guarantees that the military will re-establish constitutional order within a reasonable time?
Well, I mean, I don't see any direct connection between these two things. Being based in Mali myself for the past 4 years, I've lived through at least two coups now in the region, and I can tell you one thing: there is a sense of normalization, banalization of coups. So, life continues as usual. It doesn't mean that the return to constitutional order is going to be quick. And it doesn't necessarily mean, in fact, that returning to constitutional order should be the main goal. I mean, that's one of the things we've learned from the Malian example next door, which is that, the coups that we're seeing are elicited by deeper problems. So unless some of these problems are solved first, rushing into elections is quite unlikely to actually solve anything.
Yeah. Does ECOWAS have a real crisis here on its hands? I mean, West African nations, as you mentioned, Mali and now Burkina Faso, at least we've seen 3 military coups in the last 18 months.
Yes, well, I would say even 4, because there's Guinea also that went through one of those coups in September last year. So ECOWAS has not just 1, but 3 major military transition issues on its hands. So far, it's been quite focused on the Malian case and a bit more easy on the Guinean one. It's not clear how it's going to react regarding the situation in Burkina Faso right now, but one thing to be advised, I think, is to have quite some level of pragmatism and to come in with a constructive approach. There is a fait accompli here, which stakeholders need to deal with, and ECOWAS also needs to acknowledge that it's the crisis of, the legitimacy crisis that ECOWAS itself is going through is going to affect any move it makes. So the situation is very complex, and not just Burkina Faso stability, but also the credibility of ECOWAS is essentially on the line here.
Any news being coming through at this particular point around the physical well-being of President Kabore?
Well, we have received indirect news, but not any direct proof of well treatment or any such thing, to my knowledge. That being said, it would be quite counterproductive for the putschists to harm him. So I'm not sure that should be the main focus. Yes, in the previous coups in the region, the various presidents that were destituted have all been well treated, and it's quite unlikely that it would go differently in the particular case of Roch Kabore.
Yeah. Having, of course, yourself being based in Mali right now and having looked at that situation there, what do you make of the latest developments there? The announcement by Colonel Abdoulaye Maiga on breaking ties with France. What's the analysis there, and what is the impact of that?
Well, on the Malian-French relationship, what we can say, I think, is that they have been deteriorating for months now. Last year, 2021, was particularly difficult, with a lot of diplomatic clashes and things like that. In this context, France is perceived as pulling the strings against the current junta, including by using ECOWAS and the West African Monetary Fund and Union. So, these tensions, of course, have an impact on the way Mali positions itself towards the rest of the international community, so not just France, but essentially the whole Western axis. At the same time, Mali is also increasing and improving its relationship with Eastern European countries, such as Russia. This is obviously going to impact the way the strategy and the alliances are structured in the country right now. Whether that will play in favor of a stabilization of Mali or not remains to be seen. One thing that's important to keep in mind, I think, is that the crisis in the Sahel, which started in northern Mali 10 years ago, has been lasting, well, essentially for a decade now. There have been considerable outpouring of external forces, including France, the UN, G5 Sahel, and others. And this has produced very little, actually, improvement. So, it's in this context, I think, that we should read the Malians' drive to reconfigure alliances and to essentially try new partnerships. Of course, this comes with a cost and with significant risks, too.
Ornella, appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining us tonight on In Focus. That is head of the Sahel Programme at the Institute for Security Studies, Ornella Moderan.